In January of 1894, when the harbor ice off Iceland's Reykjanes coast had gone hard enough to trap boats in place, Inga Halldorsdottir came walking out of a split in the lava, with a basket of fresh green leaves on her arm. That alone should have been impossible. Nothing green was supposed to exist above ground that winter. The grazing fields were locked under snow. The root cellars were nearly empty. Families were stretching fish broth with hot water, just to make it look like supper. And then Inga appeared from a black crack in the earth, carrying cabbage leaves, sorrel, and onions with the roots still damp and warm. 3 months earlier, everyone had pitied her. When her father, Halldor, died in October, the inheritance had been divided with the kind of practical cruelty families like to call fairness. Arni took the river meadow. Gudrun took the silver coins. Leif took the boat share and the better mare. And Inga, the quiet daughter who listened longer than the others, was given a hand-drawn field sketch and legal claim to a stretch of cracked lava nobody wanted. The fire field, black stone, low scrub, sulfur smell in certain winds, and nothing a reasonable family would fight to own. On the back of the sketch, her father had written one line: "Where the earth still breathes, do not hurry past." Arni laughed. Gudrun tried to be kind about it, which hurt worse. Leif asked if she planned to grow supper from smoke. Inga said nothing. Not at the table, not at the burial, not when the neighbors repeated the story later. She waited, and then she walked out across the lava with the sketch in one hand and her sheepdog, Mosi, at her heel. At first, the field looked exactly as worthless as they said. A broken plain of basalt ridges. Snow caught in the seams. Steam lifting now and then from nowhere obvious. But her father had not been a fanciful man. He had survived too much to die speaking nonsense. The sketch led her past a jagged ridge and down into a hollow protected from the worst of the sea wind. There, half hidden under blown snow and dead grass, she found a slit in the basalt no wider than a turned door. Warm air touched her face from below. Not imagined warmth, not wishful thinking, real warmth. Mosi whined once. Then Inga lit a fish oil lamp and climbed down. The crack opened into a lava tube. Smooth black ceiling above her. Mineral streaks catching the flame in dull copper and green. Steam drifting in pale ribbons from the far side. And at the center of the chamber, a clear pool, small as a rowboat, with breath rising from the surface. She put both hands into the water. It was warm. Near the pool, the ground was soft. That was the second miracle. Not frozen mud, not bare stone. Soil. Dark, damp, workable soil. Soil. Ferns clung to one wall. Moss glowed at the water's edge. Something had been growing there all along, quietly, beneath the lava, while the world above froze itself empty. Inga understood then what her father had really left her. not land. Knowledge. She told no one, not Arni, not Gudrun, not the neighbors who would have come with advice or pity or claims. Secrets are easiest to lose while they are still small. So she came back with tools, a spade, a hoe, sacks of old sheep manure, pails of ash, dried seaweed from the shore, and the seed box her mother had kept for years in the warmest corner of the house. Potatoes with good eyes, turnip seed, onion sets, cabbage seed saved from the hardest-headed plants, sorrel roots, parsley. The work made her look even more foolish from the outside. She dragged driftwood across cut stone ground, carried sailcloth into a field that already had a reputation for madness, borrowed a handcart and hauled turf inland while boys watched and laughed. Only one person asked the right question, not, "What are you doing?" but, "What did your father know?" That was Svala, the widow who lent her the cart. When Inga finally showed her the warm chamber below the lava, Svala crossed herself, then laughed under her breath. Halldor looked at land the way other men looked at ledgers, she said. Not for beauty, for use. Together, the two women built a winter garden under the earth. Low-growing frames made from driftwood and bent barrel hoops. Old sailcloth hung to hold pockets of heat. Narrow channels cut from the spring so warm water moved beside the beds before draining away. Some seeds rotted, some shoots went pale. So Inga widened the entrance, cleaned a skylight crack, and hung polished bits of tin and shell to throw what light she could deeper into the chamber. She made mistakes. She corrected them. She wrote everything down. By November, there were leaves. By late November, there were rows. By December, there was an underground garden breathing quietly beneath the lava while the Atlantic storms started tearing at the coast. Then winter turned cruel. The harbor froze early. Fish catches failed. Hay stores dropped so low that farmers began slaughtering animals they had hoped to keep till spring. Children's gums swelled. Old people moved more slowly each week. Men who used to argue loudly in the storehouse stopped arguing at all. There was not enough strength left in them to waste on pride. Arni stopped saying the meadow had been the better inheritance. Gudrun cut her candles in half. Leif stood on the shore, staring at a boat trapped in ice as if it had betrayed him personally. And Inga kept walking to the fire field. Sometimes she stayed below for days when the weather above turned vicious. Mosi slept curled against the warm stone, learned the breathing of the place. When the steam thickened, when the channels needed clearing, when the lamp flame warned her the air was changing before her own body could feel it. The nearest thing she had to peace that winter was tending green things by lamplight while storms raged above rock. The nearest thing she had to fear came there too. In February, a whiteout sealed the entrance nearly shut. She had climbed part way up to clear drifted snow when the wind changed and a slab of ice-heavy crust crashed into the passage. Dust, frozen grit, a sound like the earth slamming a door. For one long minute, she could barely breathe. The lamp trembled. Steam pressed low. The way out was reduced to a jagged crawl through packed snow, broken stone, and one slab of basalt leaning at an angle no sane person would trust. She should have waited for help, but no one knew where she was. And if she died there, the garden died with her. The village above would go on starving inside sight of the one place that could have saved them. So she dug, with a spade first, then with her hands when the spade would not fit. She tore her gloves, split skin across her knuckles. Mosey wriggled ahead where the gap widened and barked from the other side like he was trying to pull her through with sound alone. By the time she dragged herself out into white air, her face was streaked black with soot and red with cold, and she was shaking so hard she had to sit against the rock just to trust her legs again. What she saw on the walk back ended the secrecy. A child crying in a doorway with no strength left in the sound. An old fisherman staring at nothing. Gudrun's youngest boy with cheeks too hollow for winter. Even Arni looking smaller than he had in autumn. The garden below ground was no longer merely hers. It was time. Before dawn the next morning, Inga filled 2 baskets. Not with everything. She was too careful for that. Survival is not generosity without thought. She harvested what the beds could spare. Loose cabbage leaves, bundles of sorrel and parsley, onions, turnips, and a sack of small potatoes from the cool pocket she had carved into the chamber wall. Then she walked into the village. No speech, no announcement, just a woman coming through snow with green in her hands, when green had become almost mythic. People followed her first with their eyes, then with their feet. The doctor knelt and turned over a leaf like he expected the color to come off. Svala stood beside Inga and said nothing at all. She looked like a witness refusing to interrupt a verdict. Arni understood first, not because he was wiser, because shame makes recognition fast. He looked from the basket to Inga's face to the black ridge inland, and in that instant he knew their father had not been delirious. Exact. Gudrun cried when Inga handed her onions for the children. Leif asked where she found them, and for the first time in months, there was no mockery in his voice. Inga told them only what they needed to hear. There is warm ground under the lava. I can grow more, but it stays under my claim, and no one comes there. without me." A few men objected. One said unusual land should belong to everyone in a hard winter. Another said the claim ought to be shared among Haldor's children, now that it had proved valuable. That kind of talk lasts exactly as long as hunger allows dignity to pretend it is still in charge. Inga looked at them and answered very calmly, "Challenge me after the children have eaten." No one spoke again. For the next 6 weeks, the village survived on her discipline. Not miracle alone. Discipline. She scheduled harvests instead of stripping the beds bare in relief. She sent broth greens first to families with the weakest elders. She thinned rows and replanted the same day. She had Arnie and Leaf cut steps into the lava descent and set ropes along the worst stretch. She put Gudrun in charge of drying leaves and storing onions, and Gudrun, once she stopped crying, proved careful enough to matter. Even the doctor became useful. He paired her vegetables with the little cod liver oil that remained and rationed both by weakness, not status. Within days, faces changed. Not to health, not yet, but away from collapse. Children stopped lying so still by the hearth. Gums bled less. Men could finish a task outdoors without sitting halfway through to hide their dizziness. And when the storms rose, Inga still made the walk. More than once the sled rope cut into her palm until the skin burned. More than once ice hit her cheeks hard enough to leave welts. More than once she thought of turning back. More than once she didn't. By March, no one called it the fire field anymore. They called it Haldor's breath when they wanted to honor the dead man who knew. They called it Inga's garden below when they wanted to honor the daughter who believed him. Inga corrected neither name. Names mattered less than the path worn into the snow by repeated journeys. Less than the sight of Arnie bent under a sack of compost where he had once laughed. Less than Gudrun kneeling beside a drying rack, learning exactly how much heat a leaf could take. Less than Leaf carving water channels in stone, because Inga had shown him where the overflow had to run. There was no grand apology. That would have been too easy. Instead, there was labor, repetition, listening. The slow repayment that begins when pride is finally made practical. When the thaw came, it came ugly. Ice broke at the harbor in slabs. Mud swallowed boots. The turf walls sweated. The sheep came out thinner than anyone liked. But the village was alive to complain about spring, and sometimes that is the closest thing to triumph people get. By then, the underground beds had already been expanded. A second chamber had been started for seed stock. A better drainage trench had been cut. Gudrun was copying Inga's planting notes into a clean ledger, so nothing learned in one hard winter would be lost in the next. Word spread. A minister mentioned the warm garden in a letter. A trader asked whether summer produce might be sold. A schoolteacher came to see cabbage growing under black stone while sleet fell outside, and left shaking her head like she had watched the earth admit a secret. Years later, people would tell the story as if the miracle had been obvious once revealed. It was not obvious. That was the whole point. The inheritance mattered because it looked worthless to impatient eyes. The gift only worked because the right daughter received it. Not the loudest, not the strongest, not the child most eager to be rewarded. The one willing to follow a strange instruction farther than mockery could reach. When people asked Inga why she trusted her father's last words when nobody else did, she never made it sound noble. She said, "He was dying. Men stop wasting nonsense when death is close." Then she would add the part that mattered more. And I listened long enough to hear what he meant. That was the true inheritance, not the field, not even the garden, the patience, to recognize warmth where everyone else saw only black stone.